Fender Telecaster or Gibson Firebird? Which one do you choose? We're going to start with the Telecaster here. Now, the Telecaster predates the Firebird by over a decade, and this is arguably one of the most, if not the most, classic electric guitars ever made. Now, for these two guitars, for as different as they are, they're incredibly similar. They both have the two pickups. They both kind of have a trebly, biting tone with some nice twang to it and everything. The Firebird was very much invented to compete with Fender, and with Fender really taking on more of the embodiment of the modern era of the 1960s when the Firebird was invented. And both just great guitars. Now, this one has a bolt-on neck. It has a slightly longer scale length, and these are two single coil pickups. Telecasters have been kind of touted as being able to do anything, and I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think they can do a lot, though. They can certainly get some cool Gibson style tones, especially if you crank up a little bit of extra mids on your amp, push some gain, and roll the tone back just a little bit. They, again, almost interchangeable in some ways, but the cool thing about them is because they're more trebly and more biting, they can retain a nicer definition to your notes, a nicer clarity, even if you're pushing a little bit more overdrive. Just one of the greatest guitars that has ever existed. Now, this is a 60s style Telecaster. This has the rosewood fingerboard. It's got the double bound body, which is just really beautiful. It's a great kind of example of a 60s Telecaster. Could these guitars be even a little bit more different if I used a 50 style Telecaster, which had the all maple neck? You'd probably notice a little bit more of a difference, but, you know, ultimately a Telecaster is a Telecaster. It's one of the few guitars where many different iterations of Telecaster that I've played all somehow sound like a Telecaster. Now, you do notice probably that it is more slender sounding. It's not quite as beefy and not quite as warm as the Firebird. And again, it cuts really, really well, and in a way that works really great, particularly if you're playing in a group that has a bunch of members. It's a guitar that will be heard no matter how many people are in your band. If you're in a big band, use a Telecaster, because your notes are just going to sail right through the mix, but not in a way that's too, unpleasant to the ears. One of the amazing things about the Telecaster is that it's widely stood the test of time with little to no change. Well, I don't want to say little to no changes, because there have certainly been a lot of different versions of the Telecaster, but you can certainly play a vintage style Telecaster and say it's just as good, if not better, than any other iteration of the Telecaster that has been out or probably will ever be out. It's just one of the things that they just got right the first time. Now we have this magnificent mythical beast. This is the Gibson Firebird. Now the Gibson Firebird, again, was invented as a way to compete with Fender. Gibson guitars were losing steam in the late 1950s, and they were really geared towards a jazz crowd, while rock and roll was just taking off, and everybody wanted Fenders because Fenders had more the look. Like for instance, like the Stratocaster, it kind of looks like it's flying through space in a way. There was something that encapsulated that era a little bit more on the Fender guitars, and players weren't wanting the old Les Pauls and certainly the big hollow bodies for this new rock and roll sound. Now, they were certainly played in blues, they were certainly played in jazz and everything, and there was a lot more. I'm simplifying this basically, but Gibson wanted to become more modern. Well, earlier they had attempted the Explorer and the Flying V, which were not really well received. They were a little before their time. They decided to come out with the Firebird and actually collaborated with a car designer on its design. The intent of the Firebird was to evoke the style of a car and emulate that similar sort of like moving through space kind of feeling. The interesting thing about the Firebird as compared with other Gibsons is it has the full neck through all the way up here, and it had two mini humbuckers. There was the Firebird 1, which had one mini humbucker, but that would, kind of akin to Fender Esquire, I suppose. The more common Firebirds would have been the Firebird 3 and the Firebird 5, which both had two pickups, and they had these mini humbuckers, which are different than regular mini humbuckers. Now, they're fatter and warmer, definitely, than Telecaster pickups, but if you listen to them, they still have that kind of slender twanginess to them, and they're certainly much more slender sounding and have more bite than the other pickups that Gibson was using at the time, which were the humbuckers. But the Firebird never really took off. It's never really been an instrument that has hung with the popular crowd nearly as much. When you think about some of the most popular electric guitars in history, you probably start with the Telecaster, Stratocaster, and Les Paul, and the Gibson SG and ES 335 are right up there, as well as guitars from other companies. Certainly Rickenbacker was huge in the day. Gretsch has its own kind of demographic and everything. The Firebird never quite made it up to that upper echelon as far as popularity of guitars, which is a shame because they're super, super cool. It's kind of halfway between a Gibson and a Fender. Now, if you've noticed, and what we're going to do after this is do a pickup by pickup comparison, this guitar against the Telecaster really sounds like a Gibson. If you put this back to back with Les Paul, you'd go, hey, that sounds like a Fender. It really exists in kind of this own unique middle realm. Now, I have said before, and I stand by this, that I think that Firebird has more in common with a Telecaster than it does with a Stratocaster. It's very commonly referred to as a Stratocaster on steroids or an overpowered Strat or whatever you want to say. And I think part of that is two reasons. Number one, the design, the shape of it. It is more like the Stratocaster than it is like the Telecaster, particularly the headstock. The headstock has that same kind of Stratocaster thing going on in its own way. And the horn, even though it's on the bottom, now this is a reverse Firebird, they later made a non-reverse Firebird, even though this was the original. But this kind of horn on the bottom, it just is a little bit more Strat-like in its shape. And the other thing is I think the neck pickup, you could say that the neck pickup in particular sounds similar to a Strat pickup more than a classic Tele pickup. And the Tele neck pickup is its own unique beast, and I've done a whole video on this if you want to watch it. But I can understand why people want to call it like a Strat on steroids or overpowered Stratocaster. But I think when push comes to shove, because it has the two pickups, it ultimately is closer to a Telecaster, because the Telecaster also can kind of get more into those pseudo Gibson tones if you really push it. And, particularly with this middle setting, it's just more Tele-like as opposed to the Stratocaster having the middle pickup. Now, there would have also been a Gibson Firebird 7, which had a middle mini humbucker. The Firebird 7 was kind of like the Firebird Custom. Had an ebony fingerboard with block inlays and the big fancy vibrola and everything. That one you could definitely say was much more Strat-like. But the classic Firebirds, again, the common ones being the 3 and the 5, and then also the 1 being pretty popular, especially with Eric Clapton playing one in the latter days of Cream. I think they're much more Tele-like than they are Strat-like. Let us know which one you like or prefer in the comments. My guess would be that a lot of people are going to say Telecaster. It's just more of a common guitar. It's something that has a whole legion of dedicated fans, and again, the Firebird has never quite lived up to that level, at least as far as popularity goes. That being said, I think this guitar stands up to anything. I absolutely love Gibson Firebirds. I think it's really cool, and one of the things that I've done is interchange them in recordings. They're close enough that I think you can do some clean stuff on a Telecaster, and then if you're recording a lead or a part that has a little bit more of an aggressive tone, you can record it with a Firebird. I think they have that much in common, but then they also have their nice differences. Again, this one's a little bit warmer and more aggressive in some ways. Of course, this one is hum canceling. This one has the 4 controls. It has a volume and a tone for each pickup as opposed to the Tele's 2 controls. So there are some other differences than that. So again, you just heard at the beginning for a jam. Now we're going to go to a pickup settings comparison. Going to do neck, middle, and bridge, both clean and overdriven on each guitar so that you can really hear it in just a very, very straight up back to back. This is what they each sound like next to each other. For this video, I'm playing into the new VHT D-Fifty amplifier, which is an awesome new amplifier that I'm really, really enjoying. Using that for some just rich, luscious, clean tones. And then for the overdriven tones, I'm using a classic Maxon 808 overdrive right into the amplifier. I'm also running a 1-control Prussian blue reverb to add a little bit of air. Again, please let us know in the comments which one do you prefer. I don't know that I could necessarily pick that I like one better than the other. I really like them both, and as similar as they are, I do also appreciate their differences. One thing I will say about a Firebird is a Firebird turns a lot of heads at a gig because people just don't see them as often. However, you have to be mentally prepared that people are going to come up to you and say, "Hey man, I love your Thunderbird," and you go, "Thanks." Now, that's not to say that a great Telecaster doesn't turn heads, and that's not to say that a great Telecaster isn't a superb thing at gigs. I probably use the Telecasters a little bit more than the Firebird. They do the telly thing, and when you're in a telly mood, there's really just nothing else that suffices. So I really am not picking one over the other here, though the one thing that I would say again is just as the Firebird has not been quite as popular as the Telecaster, is to, if you get a chance to try one out, give it a chance, because it's a cool, unique guitar that is, I think, deserving of a little bit more fandom than it's traditionally had over the years. So let's get back to some more tones here. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.